Judge Torres has once again said no to both Ripple and the SEC, denying two specific requests. And the market reacted, well, kind of. Let's dive into what's going on here. I've got insights from four attorneys in the XRP community: Bill Morgan, John Deaton, James Murphy, and Fred Rispoli. Trust me, you'll want to hear what they have to say about this. Before we get into it though, let me reassure anyone who might be worried, this decision doesn't affect the legal status of XRP itself. So no need to stress. Let's break it all down together. Hey there, fellow XRP holders. We're still in an awesome position, just like we've been since XRP Victory Day nearly 2 years ago. Remember when Judge Torres gave us the legal clarity we'd been hoping for after years of waiting? What a moment that was. Now, before we dive in, just a quick heads up. I'm not a financial expert and this isn't financial advice. Please don't make any buying or selling decisions based on what I say. I'm just a crypto enthusiast who loves chatting about all things crypto here on YouTube. So as I'm recording this, it's Thursday, June 26, 2025, and XRP is sitting at $2.10. So here's the scoop. This news first broke, as far as I know, thanks to attorney James K. Fillon, a well-known figure in the XRP community. He shared the update at 8:15 a.m. Central Time, my time zone, by the way, simply stating, breaking, Judge Torres has denied the party's motion for an indicative ruling. After seeing the news, I spent some time later in the day keeping an eye on how the market was reacting. It was pretty interesting, actually. The market had already started dipping a bit, and while XRP also dropped slightly, it's tough to say if it was directly tied to this news or just part of the broader market movement. So yeah, maybe the market reacted a bit when the news broke, but if it did, the impact was pretty small. Honestly, the market was already moving in this direction, and the decline didn't really get any steeper because of the news, which is different from what we've seen in the past, when breaking news usually causes an immediate spike or drop in XRP's price, like a sharp vertical change down to the minute. Typically, good news would cause a quick price jump, or bad news would trigger a steep drop, but that didn't happen here. If anything, the market did respond, but it wasn't dramatic. Here's what I shared earlier this afternoon at 2:44 p.m. after giving the market some time to react to the price action. I posted this on X along with the XRP price chart showing the last 24 hours of activity. When the news about Judge Torres, Ripple, and the SEC broke this morning, XRP was sitting at just over $2.15. After the announcement, there was a slight market dip, with the price dropping to just above $2.09, a small 2.7% decrease. The decline happened gradually, starting around 8:15 IM Central Time. It's worth noting that the last time we saw similar negative price action right after Ripple news was when the SEC announced their plan to appeal Judge Torres' decision. Back then, XRP's price dropped about 5% in just 90 minutes. While the drop wasn't huge, it was definitely noticeable, and if you were watching the 24-hour price chart, you have seen a sharp cliff-like drop. Today's movement feels a bit like deja vu for anyone keeping a close eye on the charts. It wasn't a gradual decline like what you're seeing on the screen now. It looked like it just fell off a cliff. Even though it was a small percentage, visually it seemed much more dramatic. Then the price bounced back a little, and the market didn't react. It didn't tank further because of that news. And honestly, market participants knew it wasn't a big deal. So yeah, I can acknowledge the price dropped after that, and it's part of what I'm pointing out here. But I'm not convinced it was entirely or even at all because of that specific news. It was already trending downward, and it kept going that way without any sharp increase in the slope. It's like people just didn't care. I even wrote that it doesn't look like the price snapped at a particular moment. It doesn't look like it fell off a cliff. Visually, if you check the screen grab, you can see what I mean. XRP holders weren't panicking, and there wasn't any huge rush to sell. Honestly, this has to be one of the least dramatic sell-offs I've ever seen for any so-called negative news on this topic. Within about 3 hours, XRP prices bounced back to $2.12. That shows almost all XRP holders get it. This news doesn't actually affect XRP itself. Simply put, they're not bothered. Now, could you argue that the news had some impact? Sure, I'm open to that. I'm not saying you're completely off base. But to be honest, I'm not fully convinced it made much of a difference. So why didn't the steepness increase? It just kept declining at the same angle it was already going. Something to think about. On another note, XRP community member and influencer Zach Rector shared his thoughts, saying, unfortunate XRP case news just turned the whole market red, and yet some still deny that XRP is leading this bull run. Attorney Morgan chimed in saying, I respectfully disagree with that 100%. I couldn't help but jump in too, pointing out that I don't agree with Zach's claim either. The market was already trending slightly downward before the news even broke. I took a look at some of the other top coins, and most of them moved in sync with each other, but XRP's price chart stands out. It looks noticeably different. And that's true. I won't bog this down with too many examples, but if you pull up a 24-hour chart for something like Ethereum, you'll see it lines up more closely with the other coin. Here's my point. The market as a whole was generally moving together. Sure, you might find a few coins that look a bit different, but what you won't find is evidence that XRP news caused the entire market to drop at that exact moment. That claim just isn't accurate. In fact, as I've already shown on the chart, the market was already trending down before the XRP news hit. So Zach Rector's statement on this just doesn't hold up. Take a look at some of these 24-hour charts. You'll see exactly what I mean. And the market was doing its thing, and while some performed better than others, a lot of these charts look pretty similar, don't they? You can see what I'm getting at here. Now, there have been moments where XRP has broken away from the pack and led the market's moves, but honestly, those moments are pretty rare. And when they do happen, they don't tend to last very long. The best example I can think of is when XRP got legal clarity and Bitcoin's price immediately followed upward. But that was a short-lived reaction. So does that mean XRP is leading this bull run? Absolutely not. Here's the reality. XRP is the top performing coin out of the top 100 by market cap since the election, and I'm thrilled because it's my largest individual holding. But let's be real, Bitcoin leads the market. It moves first, and then altcoins, including XRP, follow. That's just how it works. Now, don't get me wrong, XRP is my favorite coin, and I'll admit I'm biased, but the claim that XRP is running the show in this bull run just isn't true. I'm all about celebrating XRP's success, but let's keep things grounded, right? Let me break this down for you. It's an important update. Here's the key part. So what happened? Judge Torres issued a 5-page document. Don't worry, I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. I just want to focus on the main points and keep it simple. In this document, the SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, and Ripple Labs asked the court to do two big things. First, to dissolve the permanent injunction that required Ripple to obey the law. And second, to reduce the monetary penalty against Ripple by more than half. All right, so here's the deal. Ripple was hoping to lower the penalty from 125 million, as Judge Torres originally ruled, down to 50 million, but she said no to that. That's what this means, no reduction. She also denied Ripple's request to remove the permanent injunction, which affects how Ripple can sell XRP. Specifically, it applies to institutional sales, not programmatic sales or exchanges. So for regular folks like you and me, it doesn't affect us at all. We're in the clear, no need to stress about it. Now, since the injunction was put in place, Ripple has already found some workarounds. For example, when it comes to on-demand liquidity and using XRP as a bridge currency, one of the solutions they've implemented involves utilizing ULL-USD. The good news is, if you're talking about the XRP ledger, it does require XRP, though it's technically a different asset. Ripple's chief legal officer, Stuart Alderati, shared an update this morning after the latest news dropped. He said, "With this, the ball is back in our court. The court has given Ripple two options: either dismiss the appeal challenging the finding on past institutional sales or move forward with it. Either way, one thing remains clear. XRP's legal status as not a security hasn't changed." For now, it's business as usual. Honestly, I don't think Ripple is too worried about the money side of things. Last time they went public with numbers, they had 3.7 billion in cash. Yep, 3.7 billion. Crazy, right? It's not that they don't care at all, but this isn't something that's going to seriously impact their business. If anything, they're probably more focused on the injunction, since that could have a lasting effect on how they operate moving forward. I can see how that could be frustrating. It puts them at a disadvantage compared to their competitors, which isn't exactly ideal, right? Now, here's something interesting to add to the mix. This comes from attorney Bill Morgan, who shared a post from Stuart Alderati. He pointed out that Ripple is still keeping the option open to continue its cross appeal on institutional sales. Apparently, the appeals are on hold until mid-August, so Ripple has plenty of time to weigh its options. And that's true at this point. They could go either way. From what I've seen, most attorneys publicly commenting on this think Ripple might just want to wrap things up, even if it means keeping the injunction in place. And honestly, there are valid reasons for that approach. Let me start by sharing a post from former Fox Business journalist Eleanor Tarrant. She summed it up perfectly. Judge Torres made it clear in her ruling that private deals can't override public judgments. Her decision still serves the public interest. Here's what Eleanor wrote. The parties do not have the authority to agree not to be bound by a court's final judgment. They have not come close to doing so here. In other words, if anyone wants to make changes, Judge Torres isn't having it. She also pointed out that if they want out, they have two options: withdraw their appeals and let the judgment stand, or go through the appeals process to challenge it. And exactly where things stand right now. Now, let's look at what John Deaton had to say after this news broke earlier today. He admitted that while he believed Judge Torres would eventually grant the indicative ruling, he's not completely surprised by her decision. He even shared a video clip of himself from before the ruling, explaining why she might not be willing to remove the injunction against Ripple or lower the fine. This had a lot to do with Ripple and the SEC not making a strong enough case to convince Judge Torres, to be honest. That's something I noticed pretty much every lawyer in the XRP community pointing out. There were definitely some concerns raised. You might remember they added a little memorandum at one point, and some attorneys thought, hey, maybe this will be enough to push things forward and get Judge Torres to approve the injunction. Unfortunately, the answer ended up being no. Tough break. It seems like Ripple knew they needed to push a bit more in that direction, but unfortunately, it just wasn't quite enough. Attorney James Murphy shared a post about this, saying Judge Torres' decision not to reverse her earlier ruling in the Ripple case wasn't surprising. He also predicts that the SEC and Ripple will likely settle and drop their appeals, which would definitely be a relief. For the handful of you out there who think this still has a big impact on SRP, I just want it wrapped up so we don't have to keep stressing over it. There's not even much chatter about this potentially shaking up the markets. That said, I'll admit that if good news does come out of it, even if it doesn't directly affect SRP, the market might still get a little boost from all the excitement. Here's an example I always bring up. When Gary Gensler announced, if I'm remembering right, it was November 21st last year that he would resign, had absolutely nothing to do with XRP itself. But guess what? The price of XRP skyrocketed almost instantly. Markets, especially when they're fired up, can react to anything and everything. But here's the thing. It really doesn't matter in the long run. If it wasn't that event, something else would have triggered it. Do you honestly think that if Gensler hadn't resigned, XRP wouldn't have pumped? Of course it would have. It just would have happened at a different time, sparked by something else. And here's an interesting note from Attorney Murphy. The SEC and Ripple don't actually need court permission to dismiss their appeals. Looks like we might see both appeals dismissed soon. Why? Well, it seems likely that the lawyers on both sides expected Judge Torres wouldn't reverse her earlier ruling. Over on Twitter, XRP union member Sherry shared an interesting take. She suggested that if both sides drop their appeals and bring the case back to Judge Torres to ask for a reduced fine and to lift Ripple's injunction, she'd deny them. So now Ripple and the SEC have a big decision: accept her judgment and move on, or keep fighting the lawsuit. On another note, attorney Fred Rispoli shared a really detailed post about all this. It's a fantastic read. Seriously, great insights, but one part caught me off guard. So I asked him a quick question about it just before starting this. Haven't heard back yet, but I'm curious to see where this goes. Maybe I'm misunderstanding something here, but the point he's making comes across as pretty level-headed and easy to follow. To save time, I won't read the whole thing. It's a bit long, but feel free to pause and read it yourself if you're curious. Basically, he was saying it's the same old when it comes to the SEC, and I get where he's coming from. He went back decades, pointing out some pretty awful behavior from the SEC, even under George W. Bush. He shared specific examples to back it up, which might very well be true. I'm not going to weigh in on that, but it's definitely some food for thought. I haven't done a deep dive into all the questionable things the SEC might have done in the past, but I've definitely lived through the events under Kim Jong-un, Jay Clayton, and the leaders before him. One thing is clear, though, there's a big difference now. With Paul Atkins at the helm, the so-called war on crypto seems to be over. That's the message coming straight from the top of the new administration from Trump on down. So definitely a shift. That said, when it comes to doing the kinds of things Attorney Rispoli might argue are the right actions, maybe we're not quite there yet. He's pointed out a few areas where there's still room for improvement. Honestly, it might have been a smart move to bring in some big names to really nail the arguments that could have convinced Judge Torres to reconsider. For example, imagine having Esther Persa, an SEC commissioner, step in. That could have added some serious weight to the case. Or even the new SEC chair, Paul Atkins, coming forward to say something like, yeah, we were heading the wrong direction, under the previous administration and setting the record straight. You get the idea. Those kinds of efforts might have been enough to sway Judge Torres to rule differently. What he's theorizing here, which honestly sounds pretty reasonable, is that the SEC just didn't want to take the blame. And you can see it right here on the screen. I won't read the whole thing, but it's exactly that kind of argument, and it could very well be true. Basically, while the SEC might admit they were on the wrong path, which Paul Atkins has pointed out multiple times when it comes to crypto, they're not ready to take it further. Admitting the institution has been a total mess and throwing the foundation of the entire organization under the bus, that's a step too far for them. Definitely some interesting thoughts to consider here. From what I've read, it seems like that's a big reason why he's saying same old SEC. And honestly, I get where he's coming from. But here's the good news. He also mentioned, as you pointed out, that the injunction doesn't affect XRP on the secondary market or impact XRP ETF approvals. So we're good to go. But for us as XRP holders, this really isn't a big deal. In fact, we're in the clear here, folks. No need to worry. Everything's just fine. I'll read this last part because it's interesting. Ripple has stated that they've changed the way they operate, so the behavior that got flagged for Torres is no longer an issue, specifically how they were selling their XRP. If you check out Stuart Alderoty's post about today's ruling, something stood out to me. For the first time, at least that I noticed, he used the term historic institutional sales to describe the Torres that were flagged as problematic. Maybe he's used it before, but it caught my attention this time. To me, this suggests that both parties might be gearing up to settle and move forward with an understanding that future XRP sales to institutions will happen in a way that the SEC is okay with. That would be a pretty great outcome. And some attorneys agree, it seems like this issue might just go away. The one part that had me scratching my head a bit, and maybe this is just me misunderstanding something, was when he said the parties would drop their appeals, settle at 50 million, and move on with the injunction still in place. Not drop the injunction, but settle, and then the fine gets dropped. I'm not sure I follow that. Maybe I'm missing something here. I'm not a lawyer, so there's always a chance I'm not getting it quite right. And hey, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I have all the answers when I don't. Honestly, I'm not sure what's going on here. I don't know why he's saying that, especially when everything else I've read, including what Judge Torres wrote in the first paragraph I mentioned earlier, says otherwise. The court dissolved the permanent injunction, cut Ripple's monetary penalty by more than half, and denied the request to do more. So if the judge refused to allow that, how can Ripple and the SEC just agree to it? I don't have the answer to that yet. Maybe there's a simple explanation, or maybe I misunderstood him. Totally possible. But right now, I genuinely don't know. Either way, no need to worry. Everything's fine. And just a quick reminder, I'm not a financial advisor, so don't buy or sell anything based on what I say. Seriously, that's never a good idea.